The morning sun cut through the thin mountain air at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, casting long shadows across the gravel compound. Corporal Adelaide Brennan moved through the supply depot with practiced efficiency, her boots crunching softly on the packed earth as she conducted her daily inventory. Clipboard in hand, she counted ammunition crates with methodical precision, her fingers tracing each serial number before marking it down. The work was routine, unremarkable, exactly the kind of duty that kept a forward base running but earned little attention from anyone who mattered. She heard them before she saw them. The unmistakable swagger of voices accustomed to deference, boots hitting the ground with the confident rhythm of men who knew their reputation preceded them. Adelaide glanced up from her clipboard to see the SEAL team crossing the compound, their gear still dust-covered from the helicopter that had delivered them 20 minutes earlier. 6 men moved as a unit, their movements coordinated even in this casual approach to the operations building. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Slade led the formation, his jaw set in that particular expression Adelaide had seen on dozens of special operations officers. Absolute certainty in his own capability, justified by years of the hardest training the military could devise. His eyes swept across the base with the dismissive efficiency of someone cataloging assets and finding most of them wanting. Before we continue this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have family or friends who serve in quiet roles that keep everything running, the ones whose work rarely makes the headlines but holds everything together. Adelaide returned to her inventory, pen moving across the checklist. 15 crates of 5.56 ammunition. 20 cases of MREs requiring rotation before their expiration dates approached. Standard supplies for a base this size. Nothing complicated, nothing that required the attention of anyone beyond her quartermaster certification. The SEAL team passed within 10 meters of the depot entrance. Slade's voice carried clearly across the morning air, pitched for his men, but loud enough that anyone nearby would hear. That was the point, Adelaide knew. Men like him wanted everyone to know exactly who they were. We rotate through these remote stations every 6 weeks, Slade said to his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered chief petty officer who moved with the dangerous grace of someone who had spent years perfecting violence. The supply chain is always the weak link. Support personnel think counting boxes is the same as understanding combat readiness. The chief, his name tape reading Makoa, offered no response. His eyes scanned the perimeter walls, the guard towers, the fighting positions that ringed the small fire base. Professional assessment rather than casual observation. Adelaide made another notation on her clipboard. The comment rolled off her back like rain off treated canvas. She had heard variations of it since her first week at Sentinel. Support personnel, rear echelon, FOBITS. The special operations community had a dozen terms for soldiers whose primary weapon was a keyboard or a forklift rather than a rifle. Most of the terms were meant to sting. She finished the ammunition count and moved to the weapons maintenance section, a climate control container where spare parts and cleaning supplies were organized with the same precision she brought to everything. Her hands found the specialized bore brushes used for long-range precision rifles, examining each one for wear. These particular brushes had arrived in last week's supply drop, requisitioned by the reconnaissance teams that occasionally operated from Sentinel. Adelaide held one up to the light, checking the bristles with an attention to detail that would have seemed excessive to most supply specialists. But she knew what happened when a rifle bore wasn't properly maintained. Knew it in ways that had nothing to do with her current assignment and everything to do with a life she had deliberately left behind. A shadow fell across the container entrance. Chief Petty Officer Makoa stood there, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. He watched her examine the brush for a moment before speaking. "You handle those like you know what they are for," he said. Adelaide set the brush back in its designated slot, her movements unhurried. "Standard issue for precision weapon maintenance," she replied. "Required inventory item for forward bases supporting reconnaissance operations." Makoa nodded slowly, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Adelaide alone with her inventory and the morning heat beginning to build in the mountain valley. She returned to her checklist, but her mind had already shifted. The presence of a SEAL team at Sentinel meant something was developing in the region. The base typically hosted logistics personnel and security forces, with occasional visits from special operations units using it as a staging point. A full team rotating through suggested extended operations, the kind that required reliable supply lines and discreet support. Adelaide finished her count and secured the container, spinning the combination lock with practiced efficiency. Above her, a bird traced a lazy spiral through the clear sky. Her eyes tracked its flight automatically, calculating distance and trajectory without conscious thought. The habit was deeply ingrained, carved into her neural pathways by 10,000 hours of practice that had started when she was barely tall enough to hold her father's rifle steady. She caught herself and looked away, refocusing on the mundane reality of supply management and inventory control. That life belonged to someone else now. Someone who had made different choices, someone who needed the spotlight and the recognition. Adelaide Brennan had chosen a quieter path, one her father would have understood even if he had not lived to see her take it. The morning continued its slow progression toward afternoon. Somewhere in the operations center, Lieutenant Commander Slade and his team were being briefed on whatever mission had brought them to this remote outpost. Adelaide returned to the depot office, updated her digital logs, and began processing the requisition requests that had accumulated overnight. Routine work. Unremarkable. Exactly as she preferred it. The briefing room occupied the northwest corner of the operations building, its windows fitted with blackout curtains that turned midday into artificial twilight. Adelaide had been called to assist with equipment staging, a routine request when special operations teams needed gear prepared for immediate deployment. She moved quietly along the back wall, checking the communications equipment and spare batteries laid out on the prep table, while Lieutenant Commander Slade reviewed satellite imagery with Major Patricia Vance, the base commander. "The terrain looks worse than the intelligence report suggested," Slade said, his finger tracing a ridge line on the illuminated map display. "These valleys provide perfect concealment for insurgent movement. We're looking at a 3-day reconnaissance operation, possibly longer if we need to adjust our observation points." Major Vance nodded, her expression reflecting the weight of command decisions made with incomplete information. Air support is limited in this sector. Weather patterns in these mountains can ground helicopters for days at a time. You will be operating with minimal backup options. Adelaide finished checking the communications gear and moved to the weapons rack where the SEAL team's rifles stood in precise alignment. Her eyes swept across them with professional assessment, noting the configurations and modifications that marked each weapon as belonging to a specific operator. The sniper rifles drew her attention despite her best efforts to remain detached. 2 of them showed signs of carbon buildup around the gas systems. Nothing critical, but enough to affect accuracy over extended strings of fire. She hesitated, then reached for a cleaning rod and bore brush from her kit. The movement was automatic, muscle memory overriding the careful distance she normally maintained from anything that might reveal too much about her background. Her hands worked with practiced efficiency, field stripping the first rifle's bolt carrier group with the fluid motions of someone who had performed this task thousands of times. "What are you doing?" Slade's voice cut across the room like a knife edge. Adelaide looked up, the bolt carrier group still in her hands. "Routine maintenance, sir. Carbon buildup in a gas system. It will affect your accuracy past 800 meters." The room went quiet. Chief Petty Officer Makoa had entered during the briefing, and now he stood watching Adelaide with renewed interest. Slade crossed the room in 4 long strides, his expression hovering between annoyance and curiosity. "You are a supply specialist?" he said. "Not an armorer." Adelaide set the components down carefully on the prep table. "I am cross-trained in weapons maintenance, sir. Part of my quartermaster certification." She did not mention the national championships, the years of competitive shooting that had made her more familiar with precision rifles than most infantry officers would ever be. did not mention her father's voice in her memory, teaching her that a clean weapon was a reliable weapon, that the difference between first place and second often came down to maintenance details that other shooters overlooked. Slade picked up his rifle, examined the components Adelaide had laid out, then looked back at her with grudging acknowledgement. "Fine. Finish it, but stay in your lane, Corporal. We know our equipment." Adelaide completed the maintenance in silence while the briefing continued. Her hands moved with unconscious precision, reassembling the rifle and performing a function check that confirmed smooth operation. She repeated the process with the second rifle, aware of Makoa's occasional glances in her direction, but refusing to meet his eyes. "The insurgent activity has increased over the past 2 weeks," Major Vance was saying. 3 supply convoys hit, 2 observation posts probed during darkness hours. Someone is coordinating these attacks with more sophistication than we have seen in this sector before. Your mission is to locate their staging areas and identify their leadership structure. Adelaide finished with the rifles and moved to pack the remaining gear, her presence in the room becoming background noise as the briefing shifted to operational details. She learned that the SEAL team would insert before dawn, moving on foot to observation points in the high ridges overlooking known insurgent transit routes. They would be 30 kilometers from the nearest support, operating in terrain where helicopter extraction could be delayed by hours or made impossible by weather conditions. "Equipment staged and ready, sir," Adelaide said quietly to Major Vance. The commander nodded her dismissal, and Adelaide left the briefing room with the afternoon sun hitting her face like a physical pressure after the artificial darkness inside. She walked back toward the supply depot, her mind replaying details from the mission briefing despite knowing it was none of her business. Support personnel stayed in their lane, exactly as Slade had said. They counted boxes and processed requisitions and kept the logistics machine running so that operators like him could do the dangerous work. She reached her quarters, a small containerized housing unit she shared with no one, the benefit of being one of only 3 women assigned to Forward Operating Base Sentinel. The space was spartanly furnished, regulation issue, except for 2 items that belonged to her former life. A photograph of her father in his dress uniform, taken the day he received his Bronze Star for actions in Iraq. And beside it, carefully maintained and wrapped in oiled cloth, the Winchester Model 70 rifle he had given her on her 16th birthday. Adelaide sat on her bunk and unwrapped the rifle slowly, her fingers tracing the walnut stock worn smooth by years of use. Her father had taught her to shoot in the hills outside Butte, Montana, where the wind played tricks with bullet trajectories and the distances stretched far enough to test any marksman's skill. He had been patient and demanding in equal measure, never accepting anything less than her absolute best, never letting her blame equipment or conditions for a missed shot. "You have a gift, Addie," he had told her after she won her first junior championship at age 15. "But gifts mean nothing without discipline, without the humility to keep learning, to never assume you know everything." She had carried that lesson through 3 national championships, through the recruitment offers from multiple shooting programs, through the decision that shocked everyone who knew her. Instead of pursuing a professional shooting career, she had enlisted, chosen to serve in the same military her father had loved, chosen logistics and supply management rather than seeking a combat role that would have put her skills on display. Her father had understood. In their last conversation before the heart attack that killed him, he had told her she was making the right choice. That service meant doing what needed to be done, not chasing glory or recognition. That the quiet professionals who kept everything running were just as essential as the ones who kicked down doors. Adelaide rewrapped the rifle and returned it to its place. Outside, the afternoon light was fading toward evening. The SEAL team would deploy before dawn, vanishing into the mountains on their reconnaissance mission while she returned to inventory counts and requisition processing. 2 completely different worlds, occupying the same small firebase but separated by training, mission, and the unbridgeable gap between those who fought and those who supported the fight. She did not yet know that gap was about to collapse entirely, that circumstances would force her to reveal everything she had deliberately kept hidden. The morning would bring its own truths, delivered with violence and fire and the desperate mathematics of survival. Dawn arrived cold and sharp, the kind of mountain morning that burned the lungs and made breath visible in the thin air. Adelaide stood outside the supply depot watching the SEAL team make their final preparations, their movements efficient and silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Commander Slade moved among his men with quick gestures, checking gear and weapons with the focused intensity of a leader who knew that small oversights could cascade into fatal mistakes in the field. Chief Petty Officer Makoa approached Adelaide as she signed off on the final equipment manifest. "The rifle's cleaned up nicely," he said quietly. "Good eye on the carbon buildup." Adelaide handed him the clipboard. "Standard maintenance protocol, Chief. Nothing special." Makoa studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the depot entrance. "You move around weapons like someone who has spent time behind a trigger. More than the basic qualification courses they run for support personnel." Before Adelaide could formulate a response that would deflect without lying, Slade called for his team to move out. Makoa gave her a final appraising look, then turned and joined the formation. 6 operators melted into the darkness beyond the perimeter walls, becoming shadows that dissolved into the mountain terrain with practiced stealth. Within minutes, the only evidence of their passage was the disturbed dust near the gate and the fading echo of their footsteps on stone. Adelaide returned to the depot as the base began its daily routine. Soldiers emerged from their quarters, heading to the mess hall or their duty stations with the resigned efficiency of personnel adapted to remote deployment. The morning brought requisition requests from the motor pool, inventory updates from the medical supply officer, and a maintenance report on one of the generators that powered the base communications array. Private Lucas Chun found her mid-morning, his enthusiasm for military life still untempered by the grinding routine of garrison duty. He was 19, fresh from advanced infantry training, assigned to perimeter security while waiting for a slot in Ranger School. Adelaide had noticed him watching the SEAL team with undisguised admiration, the way young soldiers often did when confronted with operators whose reputations bordered on mythical. "Did you see them leave?" he asked, not bothering with preliminaries. 6 guys heading into terrain that would swallow a whole platoon. That is what makes them special forces. They operate on a completely different level than regular infantry. Adelaide continued entering data into her supply system, her fingers moving across the keyboard with mechanical precision. "They have specialized training for reconnaissance operations," she said neutrally. "Every military occupational specialty has its role." Chun leaned against the depot counter, his rifle slung casually across his back. "I heard Lieutenant Commander Slade has over 200 confirmed kills, that he can hit targets at ranges most people cannot even see clearly. These guys are legends." The keyboard clicking stopped briefly, then resumed. Adelaide did not look up from her screen. "Marksmanship is a perishable skill," she said. "It requires constant practice and perfect fundamentals. Distance shooting is more about understanding ballistics and environmental factors than about inherent talent." Chun laughed. "You sound like you know something about it." "I read the field manuals," Adelaide replied. "Part of understanding the equipment I manage." The young private wandered off eventually, leaving Adelaide alone with her inventory screens and the quiet hum of the depot's air conditioning unit fighting against the rising heat. She finished processing the morning requisitions and moved to the warehouse section, conducting a physical count of medical supplies that needed cross-referencing against the digital records. The radio chatter from the operations center provided background noise throughout the morning. Routine check-ins from the perimeter guard posts, weather updates from the meteorology section, administrative traffic that painted a picture of a small military base maintaining readiness in a remote location. Nothing suggested unusual activity or developing threats. Lunch came and went. Adelaide ate in the depot office, a habit that kept her separate from the social dynamics of the mess hall. She preferred the solitude, the space to think without maintaining the careful persona she wore around other soldiers. Being unremarkable required constant attention, a performance that became exhausting over extended periods. The afternoon brought a shift in the radio traffic. Guard posts reported increased helicopter activity in the distance, the distinctive sound of rotors echoing through the mountain valleys. Major Vance ordered heightened alert status, a precautionary measure that sent soldiers to fighting positions and increased the frequency of perimeter patrols. Adelaide secured the supply depot and moved to the operations center, standard protocol when the base elevated its defensive posture. The building buzzed with controlled activity, officers and NCOs monitoring communications, while analysts updated situation maps with fragmentary information. She found a position near the back wall, available for tasking but staying clear of the command staff, making tactical decisions. The SEAL team had reached their primary observation point, according to the latest radio check. Their position deep in the mountains, overlooking insurgent transit routes. Makoa's voice came through clearly on the encrypted channel, reporting negative contact and good visibility for their surveillance mission. Everything proceeding according to plan. Major Vance stood near the main display, her attention divided between multiple information sources. "The increased helicopter activity concerns me," she said to her operations officer. "Could be unrelated to our mission, but I do not believe in coincidences in this region. Could be a resupply operation," the operations officer suggested. "Or moving personnel between positions. Or coordinating something larger," Vance replied. "I want all observation posts reporting every 30 minutes. Any change in the pattern, I want to know immediately." Adelaide watched the displays, her mind automatically processing the tactical picture taking shape. The SEAL team positioned in the high ground, insurgent activity potentially increasing in the valleys below, helicopter movements suggesting coordination that implied planning and resources. The pieces formed a pattern that triggered instinct honed by years of studying tactical situations, even if her official role involved nothing more complex than managing supply chains. The afternoon stretched toward evening. Alert status remained elevated, but nothing developed to justify the increased tension. Soldiers rotated through fighting positions, maintaining readiness while hoping for boredom. The base settled into the peculiar suspended state of waiting for something that might never arrive. Adelaide returned to the depot as the sun began its descent toward the western ridgeline. She completed her end-of-day reports and secured the sensitive equipment, going through the familiar routine that marked the boundary between duty hours and personal time. Her quarters waited, and with them the quiet solitude where she could drop the careful mask of the unremarkable supply specialist. She did not know that the waiting was almost over. That dawn would bring violence and chaos. That circumstance would strip away every carefully constructed layer of anonymity she had built. The mountains held secrets in their shadows, and some of those secrets were about to explode into the harsh light of combat. Morning arrived with a sharper edge than usual, the air carrying a tension that Adelaide felt before she fully understood its source. The base had maintained elevated alert status through the night. Guard rotations doubled and communications equipment manned continuously. She dressed quickly and headed to the depot, aware that heightened readiness meant increased demands on supply chains and equipment availability. The operations center was already busy when she passed it on her way to morning briefing. Major Vance stood at the main display conferring with her intelligence officer, their voices low and urgent. Adelaide caught fragments of conversation about movement patterns and threat assessments before continuing to the depot where her own responsibilities waited. Private Chun intercepted her before she reached the entrance, his usual enthusiasm replaced by nervous energy. "Did you hear the reports?" he asked. "Guard posts spotted fires in the valleys overnight. Multiple locations, coordinated timing. Something is building out there." Adelaide unlocked the depot and began her opening procedures, checking security seals and initiating the computer systems that tracked every piece of equipment under her control. "Fires could mean many things," she said. "Campfires, controlled burns, signal communications. Intelligence will assess the significance. Chun followed her inside, clearly wanting to talk through his anxiety. The SEAL team is still out there, 30 kilometers away with all this activity increasing. What if they get compromised? They are trained for exactly these situations, Adelaide replied, pulling up her inventory screens. Special reconnaissance is their specialty. If anyone can operate undetected in hostile terrain, it is them. Her words carried more conviction than she felt. The tactical picture troubled her in ways she could not fully articulate. Patterns emerging that suggested coordination and planning beyond typical insurgent activity. The increased helicopter movements, the coordinated fires, the timing of it all, while a high-value reconnaissance team operated in the area. Coincidence seemed unlikely. The morning progressed with unusual activity levels. Maintenance crews checked generators and communications equipment with extra diligence. The medical section prepared additional trauma supplies. The motor pool staged vehicles for rapid deployment. Every section of the base responded to the heightened threat environment with professional efficiency, each soldier knowing their role in the broader defensive architecture. Adelaide processed emergency supply requisitions, prioritizing ammunition and medical equipment while ensuring that routine needs did not get overlooked in the focus on potential combat operations. Her attention to detail caught a discrepancy in the small arms ammunition count. 20 cases that should have been in storage but were showing as transferred to the eastern defensive position. She made a note to physically verify the location during her afternoon rounds. The radio traffic from the operations center shifted in tone around mid-morning. The SEAL team had moved to a secondary observation point, repositioning to get better visibility on suspected insurgent staging areas. Chief Petty Officer Makoa reported their status with calm professionalism, noting increased vehicle activity in the valleys below their position, but no direct threats to their location. Lieutenant Commander Slade came on the channel shortly after, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone managing multiple tactical variables. "We are tracking a larger force than intelligence predicted," he said. "Multiple vehicles, possibly 50 to 70 personnel, moving with military discipline. Request updated guidance on observation parameters versus active reconnaissance." Major Vance authorized them to maintain observation only, emphasizing the importance of gathering intelligence without compromising their position. The SEAL team acknowledged and went silent, nothing but the encrypted carrier signal confirming they remained active and monitoring. Adelaide left the depot at noon to conduct her ammunition verification, walking the perimeter to the eastern defensive position where heavy machine guns covered the most likely approach route to the base. The young specialist manning the position confirmed the ammunition transfer, pointing to the additional cases staged within easy reach of his weapon. Adelaide updated her records and continued her circuit, checking each fighting position and noting equipment status. The mountains stretched away in every direction, their peaks sharp against the cloudless sky. Somewhere in those ridges the SEAL team watched and waited, professional observers gathering intelligence that would inform future operations. Adelaide understood the patience required for that work, the discipline of remaining motionless for hours while cataloging enemy movements and patterns. She had spent countless hours in similar positions during competitive shooting, learning to control her breathing and heart rate while waiting for the perfect moment to break a shot. She pushed the memory aside and returned to the depot. The afternoon brought Chief Petty Officer Makoa back to base, arriving on a supply helicopter that had been scheduled for routine logistics but was now being used for an emergency resupply run. He looked exhausted, dirt and sweat marking his face with the evidence of hard movement through difficult terrain. Adelaide met him at the landing pad, clipboard ready with the supplies he had requested by radio. Makoa took the pack without comment, checking contents with quick efficiency. His eyes met hers briefly, something unreadable passing behind them. "Situation is developing faster than we anticipated," he said quietly. "The force we are tracking shows training and equipment beyond typical insurgent capabilities. Someone is funding and organizing them with real resources." Adelaide handed him additional ammunition magazines. The base is at heightened readiness. Major Vance has doubled the guard rotations and prepared rapid reaction forces. Makoa nodded, slinging the pack across his shoulders. The concern is not the base. You have walls and heavy weapons and air support available within range. We are 30 kilometers out with 6 men and whatever ammunition we can carry. If they locate our position, extraction becomes complicated very quickly. He boarded the helicopter without further conversation, the rotors already spinning up for immediate departure. Adelaide watched the aircraft lift off and angle back toward the mountains, carrying supplies and one operator back to a team that was increasingly surrounded by potential threats. The dust settled slowly in the afternoon heat, and she returned to the depot with the image of Makoa's exhausted face burned into her memory. Evening brought no reduction in the alert status. If anything, the tension increased as darkness approached. Guard posts reported additional fires in the valleys, more numerous than the previous night. The pattern suggested coordination, possibly even communication through visual signals. Intelligence analysts worked to build a comprehensive picture from fragmentary information, but the conclusions all pointed in the same direction. Something significant was building in the area, and the timing was not coincidental. Adelaide secured the depot and returned to her quarters. She sat on her bunk for a long moment, staring at the photograph of her father and the rifle wrapped beside it. His voice echoed in her memory, lessons about preparedness and readiness, about being ready when the moment demanded everything you had trained for. She unwrapped the rifle and began cleaning it with meditative focus, her hands moving through familiar motions that required no conscious thought. The weapon was already immaculate, maintained with religious devotion, but the ritual provided comfort and focus. When she finished, she wrapped it again and placed it carefully in its position. Sleep came slowly, disturbed by thoughts of the SEAL team in the mountains and the increasing evidence of coordinated enemy activity. Adelaide lay in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the base, maintaining its vigil, soldiers manning positions, and scanning the darkness for threats that might never materialize. Dawn would bring answers, though none of them would be what anyone expected or wanted. The explosion tore through the pre-dawn stillness with volcanic fury, lifting Adelaide from her bunk before conscious thought could register what was happening. The concussion wave rattled the containerized housing unit, shaking loose dust and causing the metal walls to flex with absorbed energy. She was moving before the second explosion hit, pulling on her boots and grabbing her tactical vest from its position beside the door. The base alarm shrieked into the darkness, its urgent wail competing with the crackle of small arms fire and the deeper thunder of mortar rounds impacting across the compound. Adelaide burst from her quarters into chaos. Soldiers ran toward fighting positions, silhouettes against the orange glow of fires burning near the motor pool. Tracer rounds arced across the perimeter in both directions, incoming and outgoing fire painting geometric patterns against the night sky. She sprinted toward the supply depot, muscle memory guiding her through the confusion. The depot contained critical ammunition and medical supplies that became exponentially more valuable during combat operations. Her responsibility was securing those resources and ensuring they reached the soldiers who needed them. A mortar round impacted 30 meters to her left, the explosion showering her with gravel and the metallic taste of cordite. Adelaide kept moving, reaching the depot entrance and finding it already damaged. The blast door hung twisted on its hinges, one corner torn free by shrapnel that had peppered the reinforced structure. She forced her way through the gap into the interior where emergency lighting cast everything in red emergency illumination. The radio on her vest crackled to life with multiple voices competing for transmission priority. All positions report status. Guard Post 3 taking effective fire from the eastern ridge. Mortar impacts across the compound. 2 confirmed casualties. Medical teams responding. Adelaide moved through the depot with practiced efficiency, checking the ammunition storage first. The heavy cases remained secured, their straps and tie-dones holding despite the building's abuse. She grabbed a handcart and began loading critical supplies, prioritizing rifle ammunition and medical trauma kits. The operations center came on the radio with controlled urgency. All personnel be advised, this is a coordinated attack on multiple base sections. Air support has been requested, but weather is delaying helicopter response. Estimate 30 minutes minimum before gunships can reach our position. Another explosion rocked the depot, closer this time, the concussion wave staggering Adelaide and nearly toppling her loaded cart. She steadied it and pushed toward the door, aware that ammunition did no good locked in storage while soldiers fought to defend the perimeter. The twisted entrance required careful navigation, the cart barely fitting through the gap in the damaged door. Outside, the tactical picture was deteriorating rapidly. Heavy machine gun fire swept the northern wall where insurgents were attempting to breach the wire obstacles. Mortar rounds continued to fall with methodical precision, walking across the compound in a pattern that suggested forward observers coordinating the fire. This was not a random harassment attack. Someone had planned this operation with detailed knowledge of the base layout and defensive positions. Adelaide pushed the cart toward the nearest fighting position, a reinforced bunker where two soldiers maintained suppressive fire against targets in the darkness beyond the perimeter. The corporal manning the heavy machine gun saw her approaching and gestured frantically. "We are down to our last belt," he shouted over the weapon's thunder. "Medical is requesting trauma supplies. We have 2 wounded in the position." Adelaide unloaded ammunition cases and medical kits, her movements efficient despite the incoming fire that cracked overhead and impacted nearby. The corporal changed belts with practiced speed while his partner, a specialist whose name tape read Kowalski, grabbed the medical supplies and moved to treat casualties deeper in the bunker. The radio erupted with a new voice, desperate and strained. "This is the SEAL team. We are under effective fire at our position. Multiple insurgent forces have engaged our location. Estimate 40 to 50 hostiles with heavy weapons. Request immediate air support and extraction." Adelaide recognized Lieutenant Commander Slade's voice, the arrogance stripped away by the brutal mathematics of being outnumbered and surrounded. Major Vance responded with controlled professionalism despite the chaos audible in the operations center behind her. "SEAL team be advised, air support is weather delayed. Ground relief force is assembling, but requires time to reach your position. Can you hold your current location?" The response came through broken by static and the distinctive crack of rifle fire. "Negative, we are heavily engaged and taking casualties. Our position is being overrun. We need extraction now, or we're not getting out of here." Adelaide stood frozen for a moment, the tactical picture crystallizing with terrible clarity. The attack on the base was not the primary operation. It was a diversion, pinning down forces and preventing any response to the real target. The SEAL team had been located, tracked, and was now being systematically destroyed by a force that had prepared specifically for this engagement. She returned to the depot at a run, her mind racing through possibilities and resources. The relief force Major Vance mentioned would take at least 20 minutes to assemble and another 40 to reach the SEAL position. Air support was grounded by weather. The team had minutes, not hours, before they were completely overrun. The depot's interior felt surreal after the chaos outside, the red emergency lighting casting strange shadows across equipment and supplies. Adelaide moved to the weapons section, her hands finding the precision rifles stored there for base security snipers. Her fingers traced the familiar contours, feeling the weight and balance of tools she understood better than most people understood language. The radio continued its desperate updates. SEAL team taking heavy casualties, multiple wounded, ammunition critical. The calm professionalism in Makoa's voice as he provided the status report made it somehow worse. That level of control maintained while their tactical situation collapsed around them. Adelaide stood in the depot holding a rifle she had no authorization to take, no orders to use, no official reason to even touch. Support personnel stayed in their lane. They provided supplies and logistics while the operators did the fighting. That was the military structure, the hierarchy that defined roles and kept everything functioning. But structure meant nothing when good soldiers were dying 30 kilometers away, while she stood in safety, counting ammunition they would never live to requisition. Her father's voice echoed in memory. Service means doing what needs to be done, not chasing glory or recognition. She slung the rifle across her back and began loading ammunition into a tactical pack. The decision was made, consequences be damned. If the SEAL team was going to survive, someone needed to change the tactical equation. Someone needed to do what Adelaide Brennan had trained her entire life to do, the skills she had deliberately hidden under layers of careful anonymity and deliberate mediocrity. The supply specialist was gone. What remained was a national champion marksman with skills that could reach across impossible distances and change the mathematics of survival. Adelaide moved toward the door and the chaos beyond, carrying a weapon that suddenly felt like an extension of her will. Every doubt and hesitation burned away by the simple clarity of soldiers dying while she possessed the capability to help them. The compound remained under sustained attack as Adelaide emerged from the depot, the rifle slung across her back and ammunition pack secured tightly against her shoulders. Mortar rounds continued their methodical bombardment, each explosion walking closer to critical infrastructure while defenders fought to maintain the perimeter against probing attacks. The tactical situation balanced on a knife edge. Everyone focused on immediate threats while 30 kilometers away the SEAL team fought for survival against overwhelming odds. Adelaide moved through the chaos with singular purpose, heading toward the eastern defensive wall, where the terrain offered the best vantage point overlooking the mountain valleys. Soldiers rushed past her carrying ammunition and medical supplies, too focused on their own desperate tasks to question why a supply specialist was carrying a precision rifle into the heart of the battle. She reached the eastern wall and began climbing the reinforced tower that anchored the defensive line. The structure rose 12 meters above the compound, its elevated position designed to provide overlapping fields of fire across the approach routes. 2 soldiers occupied the upper platform, manning a heavy machine gun that hammered out controlled bursts toward targets in the darkness beyond the wire. Sergeant Tyrone Walsh commanded the position, a veteran infantry NCO whose calm demeanor provided stability in the chaos. He glanced at Adelaide as she reached the platform, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "Corporal, what are you doing up here? This is a fighting position, not a supply point." Adelaide moved to the far edge of the platform, where a spotter scope was mounted on a reinforced tripod. "The SEAL team needs support," she said. "Air assets are grounded. Ground relief is too far away. Someone has to change the tactical equation." Walsh stared at her for a moment, then returned his attention to directing his gunner's fire. "Whatever you think you're going to do, make it quick. We are barely holding this position as it is." The spotter scope provided a window into the darkness beyond the base perimeter. Adelaide adjusted the focus, her hands moving with the unconscious precision of thousands of hours behind similar optics. The scope's night vision capability painted the terrain in shades of green and gray, revealing the contours of valleys and ridgelines that stretched toward the mountains where the SEAL team fought for their lives. The radio traffic continued its grim updates. SEAL team reporting 6 hostiles on their eastern flank, heavy machine gun fire suppressing their movement. Multiple wounded, ammunition down to emergency reserves. Slade's voice had lost all trace of arrogance, replaced by the flat tone of someone calculating survival odds and finding them insufficient. Adelaide studied the terrain through the scope, her mind automatically processing distances and elevations. The SEAL team was positioned approximately 3 kilometers into the mountain range, their location marked on her mental map by years of studying topographical data and understanding how terrain influenced tactical operations. 3,000 meters in straight-line distance. But the elevation changes and environmental factors made it exponentially more complex than a flat-range shot. Sergeant Walsh's radio crackled with new urgency. "All positions be advised. SEAL team reports they are being overrun." multiple insurgents breaching their defensive perimeter. This is their final transmission before they go to ground. The words hit Adelaide like physical blows. Going to ground meant abandoning their position, attempting to escape and evade through hostile terrain with wounded personnel and no extraction available. It was a desperate last option that rarely ended well, especially when enemy forces controlled the surrounding area and could coordinate pursuit operations. She moved to the rifle, unslinging it and checking the action with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed. The weapon was a precision instrument, configured for extreme long-range engagement, equipped with optics that could resolve targets at distances most soldiers could not imagine reaching. Adelaide settled into a shooting position, the rifle stock finding her shoulder with the familiar comfort of an old friend. Walsh noticed her setup and moved closer, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Corporal, that is a 3-kilometer shot across mountainous terrain in darkness with variable winds. That is beyond the effective range of that weapon system. That is beyond what anyone can shoot." Adelaide adjusted the optics elevation, her fingers working the turret with practiced precision. "The effective range of any weapon system is limited by the shooter's capability," she said quietly. "The rifle can reach that far. The question is whether I can make the calculations and execute the fundamentals." She pressed her eye to the scope, the world narrowing to the circular field of view that would define her reality for the next critical minutes. The SEAL team's position was marked in her mind, a specific coordinate in 3-dimensional space that required perfect calculation to reach. Wind speed and direction, air density at different elevations, the Coriolis effect over extreme distance, the countless variables that separated hope from precision. The radio erupted with Chief Petty Officer Makoa's voice, strained and urgent. "Enemies everywhere. We have hostiles inside our perimeter, multiple directions. Request any available support. We are about to be overrun." Adelaide's breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping as years of training asserted control over physiological responses. She could see muzzle flashes through the scope, brief bursts of light that marked enemy positions surrounding the SEAL team. The insurgents were closing the ring, preparing for the final assault that would overwhelm the defenders through sheer weight of numbers. Her finger found the trigger, the pressure familiar and precise. The first shot would reveal her position to anyone paying attention, would mark her as a threat and potentially draw fire to the tower. But none of that mattered compared to the simple equation of soldiers dying while she possessed the capability to reach across impossible distance and change their reality. Walsh stood beside her, transfixed by what he was witnessing. A supply specialist settling into a precision shooting position with the confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. His hand moved to his radio, instinct telling him to report this development to someone with authority to understand what was happening. Adelaide's world contracted to the scope's view, to the calculations running through her mind like an automated computer program. Distance to target, angle of elevation, wind drift compensation across multiple terrain features, the Earth's rotation affecting bullet flight over extreme distance. Variables most shooters never encountered, factors that separated recreational marksmanship from the precision required at the absolute edge of possibility. She found her first target through the scope, an insurgent with an RPG launcher, positioned on a small rise that gave him clear line of sight to the SEAL team's failing defensive position. The mathematics crystallized in her mind, elevation and windage corrections feeding into muscle memory that needed no conscious thought to execute. Adelaide's breathing stopped at the natural respiratory pause, her finger increasing pressure on the trigger with the smooth inevitability of sunrise. The rifle fired, its report sharp and clean in the chaos of the compound's battle. The recoil pressed against her shoulder, absorbed and controlled, her body already settling for the follow-up shot before the first bullet completed its 3-second flight across the valley. Through the scope, she tracked the bullet's arc, watching for impact, for confirmation that all her calculations had aligned with reality. The insurgent with the RPG was raising his weapon, preparing to fire on the trapped SEALs, unaware that death traveled toward him faster than sound itself. The bullet arrived with mathematical precision, 3,000 meters across mountain terrain in darkness and variable wind, finding its target with the certainty of perfectly executed fundamentals. The insurgent dropped, the RPG falling unfired to the rocky ground. Sergeant Walsh stood frozen beside Adelaide, his radio halfway to his mouth as he processed what he had just witnessed. The shot had been impossible by every standard he understood about long-range marksmanship. Yet through his binoculars he could see the insurgent position now empty, the RPG abandoned on the rocks. His mind struggled to reconcile the unremarkable supply specialist with the demonstration of skill he had just observed. Adelaide was already acquiring her second target, her movements fluid and economical. The rifle's bolt cycled smoothly, chambering a fresh round while she scanned the terrain through her scope. The SEAL team's defensive position was visible now, marked by muzzle flashes and the distinctive tracers of their weapons. The insurgent forces had them surrounded in a deadly horseshoe, closing from three sides while using terrain features for cover and concealment. The radio crackled with Slade's voice, desperate and confused. "Who is shooting? That RPG position just went down. Are we getting air support?" "Negative on air support." Major Vance responded from the operations center. "Weather still has helicopters grounded. All ground forces are engaged, defending the base perimeter." "Then where did that shot come from?" Slade demanded. "Someone just eliminated a critical threat to our position." Adelaide ignored the radio chatter, her attention focused entirely on the tactical problem before her. She had identified 6 insurgent positions that posed immediate threats to the SEAL team. 2 machine gun emplacements providing suppressive fire, 3 rifle positions with clear lines of sight into the defensive perimeter, and a mortar team preparing to drop rounds directly into the SEAL position at close range. Each target required precise calculation and execution, and time was measured in seconds before the final assault overwhelmed the defenders. Her second shot took the mortar team's gunner, the bullet crossing 3,000 meters to arrive exactly where Adelaide's calculations predicted. The insurgent collapsed across his weapon, his partner freezing in confusion before scrambling for cover. The mortar fell silent, one critical threat eliminated. Walsh found his voice, speaking into his radio with controlled urgency. "Tower 6 to operations, you need to see this. Corporal Brennan is engaging targets at the SEAL team position. She is making shots that should not be possible." The operations center responded with disbelief. "Say again, Tower 6. Did you say Corporal Brennan from Supply is shooting?" "Confirmed," Walsh replied. "Multiple hits at approximately 3,000 meters. She is changing the tactical equation up there." Adelaide cycled the bolt again, her breathing controlled and methodical. Through the scope, she tracked an insurgent moving between cover positions, his path taking him toward a flanking position that would allow enfilade fire into the SEAL defensive line. She led the target, compensating for his movement and the wind that pushed across the valley in complex patterns. The shot broke clean, and 3 seconds later the insurgent stumbled and fell, his weapon clattering against the rocks. The SEAL team's radio traffic shifted in tone. "Contact down on our eastern flank," Makoa reported. "Someone is hitting them from distance. These are precision shots, not random fire. Keep your heads down," Slade ordered. "Someone is helping us, but we do not know who or how long they can sustain fire." Adelaide moved to her fourth target, one of the machine gun positions that had the SEAL team effectively pinned. The gunner was partially concealed behind rocks, only his upper body visible as he fired control bursts. She calculated the offset required to account for the limited target profile, adjusting her aim point to maximize the probability of a decisive hit. The rifle fired, its report becoming a familiar rhythm in the chaos of the base's defensive battle. Private Lucas Chun appeared at the tower entrance, his face flushed from running and his eyes wide with shock. "Corporal Brennan, they're saying in operations that you are shooting at targets kilometers away. They're saying you are hitting them." Adelaide chambered another round, never taking her eye from the scope. I need you to spot for me, she said calmly. Watch the impacts and call corrections if I miss. Wind is variable and the light conditions are deteriorating. Chun moved to the spotter scope with shaking hands. His previous admiration for the SEAL team now transferred to the woman beside him who was performing feats of marksmanship he had not imagined possible. He found the SEAL position in his scope, saw the insurgent forces surrounding them, and understood for the first time the desperate mathematics of the situation. Target, Eastern Ridge, machine gun position behind the large boulder, Adelaide said. Range 3,050 meters, elevation angle 15 degrees. I see it, Chun confirmed, his voice steadying as training took over. Gunner is partially concealed. Wind looks like it is pushing left to right. Adelaide made her adjustments and fired. Through her scope, she tracked the bullet's flight, watching for the impact that would confirm her calculations. The machine gun continued firing for another second, then went silent. Chun confirmed the hit, his voice carrying disbelief and awe in equal measure. Target down, confirmed kill. That was an incredible shot. The SEAL team's tactical situation was improving incrementally with each threat Adelaide eliminated. The insurgent assault had stalled, their commanders confused by the sudden loss of key personnel and support weapons. The mathematical certainty of their overwhelming numbers was being disrupted by precision fire from a source they could not locate or counter. Sergeant Walsh watched Adelaide work with growing comprehension. The smooth efficiency of her movements, the practiced precision of her setup and execution, the calm professionalism under pressure. This was not luck or accident. This was mastery developed over years of dedicated training and practice. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "What supply specialist shoots like this?" Adelaide acquired her sixth target, another machine gun position that had resumed firing at the SEAL team. "I am someone who knows what needs to be done," she replied. "Background does not matter right now. What matters is keeping those men alive until extraction can reach them." She fired again, the bullet crossing the impossible distance to find its mark with mathematical precision. The machine gun fell silent, its crew eliminated or scattered. 6 shots, 6 critical targets neutralized, the tactical balance shifting with each perfectly executed fundamental. The radio erupted with Chief Petty Officer Makoa's voice, carrying something that might have been hope. "Whoever is providing fire support, you are saving our lives. The pressure is decreasing. We have breathing room." Multiple confirmed kills on insurgent positions. Major Vance came on the channel, her command voice carrying across all frequencies. "SEAL team, be advised, Corporal Adelaide Brennan is providing precision fire support from Base Tower 6. Ground relief force is still assembling, but the tactical situation is stabilizing." Slade's response came through after a long pause. "Brennan? The supply specialist? That is impossible." Adelaide chambered her 7th round, her attention never wavering from the scope. "Possible or impossible does not change the reality," she said to no one in particular. "The shots are landing, the threats are being eliminated, and those men have a chance to survive. Everything else is just conversation." The mountain darkness was beginning to fade toward dawn, the first hints of gray light touching the eastern ridgeline. The improved visibility would help Adelaide acquire targets more quickly, but it would also make the SEAL team more vulnerable and expose her position to counterfire. The equation was changing, and she needed to maximize her impact while the advantage remained. The growing dawn light transformed the tactical picture, revealing terrain features that had been hidden in darkness. Adelaide adjusted her scope settings to account for the changing light conditions, her mind automatically recalculating the countless variables that affected bullet flight over extreme distance. The insurgent forces surrounding the SEAL team were more visible now, but they were also adapting to the precision fire that had disrupted their assault. Through her scope, Adelaide watched enemy fighters moving more cautiously, using terrain masking and staying close to cover. They had identified that someone was engaging them from long range, though they clearly had not located her firing position or understood the extreme distance involved. Small groups attempted to flank the SEAL defensive perimeter using draws and gullies that provided concealment from direct observation. Target moving in the northern ravine, Private Chen called out, his voice steadier now as he settled into the spotter role. 3 personnel, appears to be a fire team attempting to gain a flanking position. Range approximately 3,200 meters. Adelaide shifted her aim point, tracking the movement through a gap in the terrain. The insurgents were disciplined, moving in tactical bounds with one element providing cover while the others advanced. She selected the lead fighter, the one who appeared to be directing the maneuver. Her breathing slowed, finger finding the trigger's familiar pressure point. The shot broke clean. The bullet arced across the valley, fighting gravity and wind to reach its distant target. Adelaide tracked through her scope, watching the lead insurgent drop as the round found him. The remaining fighters scattered, their coordinated advance disintegrating into confused retreat. Confirmed hit, Chen reported. Remaining personnel are breaking contact and moving back toward cover. The SEAL team used the respite to consolidate their position. Adelaide could see them through her scope now, 6 figures moving with the controlled urgency of professionals managing a tactical withdrawal. They were dragging wounded teammates, redistributing ammunition, preparing for the next phase of their survival. Lieutenant Commander Slade came on the radio, his voice carrying grudging respect that fought against disbelief. Brennan, if you can hear this, you have bought us critical time. We are consolidating and preparing to move to an alternate position. Whatever training you have, it is beyond anything I have encountered. Adelaide did not respond, her attention fixed on scanning for new threats. The insurgent forces were regrouping, and she could see what appeared to be a command element organizing behind a ridgeline 800 meters from the SEAL position. 3 figures stood together, one of them gesturing and apparently issuing orders to fighters scattered across multiple positions. High-value target, she said quietly. Northern Ridgeline, command element. That is who is coordinating this operation. Walsh moved closer, using his binoculars to locate the position Adelaide had identified. That is a long shot even for you, he said. Maybe 900 meters from the SEAL team position, which makes it almost 4,000 meters from here. Adelaide made minute adjustments to her scope, her calculations becoming more complex as distance increased. 4,000 meters pushed the absolute limits of the rifle system and ammunition she was using. The bullet would be in flight for nearly 5 seconds, traveling in a high arc that made it vulnerable to wind drift across multiple elevation bands. But eliminating the command element would disrupt the insurgent operation more effectively than picking off individual fighters. Chun watched through the spotter scope, his breathing synchronized with Adelaide's as he prepared to call the shot. The entire tower had gone quiet, even the machine gunner pausing his fire to watch what was about to happen. Word had spread across the radio network. The supply specialist was attempting a shot that exceeded the documented capabilities of the weapon system. Adelaide settled deeper into her position, her body becoming part of the rifle in a unity developed through thousands of hours of practice. Her father's voice echoed in memory, lessons about patience and precision, about taking the time to do it right rather than rushing and hoping. The wind pushed across the valley in patterns she could read through subtle environmental indicators, grass movement and dust swirls, and the way morning thermals affected air density. Firing, she announced, then broke the shot with perfect trigger control. The rifle's report echoed across the compound. The bullet left the muzzle at over 2,000 feet per second, beginning its long arc toward a target so distant that most observers would have considered it beyond any possibility of engagement. Adelaide stayed in her scope, tracking the bullet's theoretical path, waiting for confirmation that mathematics and skill had aligned with reality. The seconds stretched. Chun counted under his breath, marking time while everyone on the tower held their collective breath. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. Adelaide saw the command element continue their discussion, unaware that death traveled toward them faster than sound could carry warning. Impact, Chen called out. Target down. Holy God! You hit him at 4,000 meters. The insurgent commander collapsed, and Adelaide watched the immediate effect ripple through the enemy force. The organized coordination began fragmenting, fighters looking toward their command element for orders that would not come. The mathematical certainty of their superior numbers meant nothing without leadership to direct and coordinate their employment. Slade's voice came through the radio with undisguised awe. We just watched their commander go down. Brennan, who trained you? Where did you learn to shoot like this? Adelaide was already scanning for her next target, never allowing success to break her concentration. Training is not relevant, she replied. Results matter. You need to use this disruption to consolidate and move to a more defensible position. The SEAL team began their tactical withdrawal, moving in coordinated bounds while Adelaide provided overwatch. She eliminated 2 more threats during their movement, insurgents who attempted to pursue the withdrawing team. Each shot required recalculation as ranges and angles changed, but her fundamentals remained constant regardless of the specific variables. Major Vance's voice carried command authority across the radio network. All stations be advised, weather is clearing and air support will be airborne in 15 minutes. Ground relief force is mounted and moving towards SEAL team position. Estimated arrival 30 minutes. The tactical equation was shifting decisively now. The insurgent assault had been disrupted by precision fire, their command structure decapitated, their numerical advantage neutralized by uncertainty and casualties they had not anticipated. The SEAL team had survived long enough for support to arrive, but with ammunition measured in grams and skill measured in years of dedicated practice. Adelaide's ammunition supply was running low. She had fired 11 rounds, each one crossing impossible distances to eliminate critical threats. The remaining rounds in her magazine represented her reserve, held back for emergency targets that might emerge before relief forces arrived. She settled into a steady scanning pattern, watching the insurgent positions for any sign of renewed coordination. Private Chun sat beside her, his earlier nervousness replaced by something approaching reverence. I have never seen anything like this, he said quietly. The instructors at Basic talked about precision marksmanship, but this is beyond anything they described. You are shooting at distances I did not know were possible. Possible is defined by capability and execution, Adelaide replied, her eye never leaving the scope. Any weapon system can be pushed beyond its documented parameters if the fundamentals are perfect and the calculations account for all variables. Distance is just another factor to manage. Sergeant Walsh checked his watch, calculating the timeline before air support arrived. 15 minutes, he said. You need to keep them disrupted for 15 more minutes, then helicopters will end this fight decisively. Adelaide tracked a group of insurgents attempting to organize a final push against the SEAL team. They were moving more cautiously now, clearly aware that long-range precision fire had changed the tactical dynamic. She selected the fighter who appeared to be leading the element, waited for him to expose himself moving between cover positions, then fired her 12th round. The shot connected, and the attempted assault dissolved before it could develop momentum. The insurgent forces were breaking, their will to fight eroded by casualties they could not anticipate or prevent. Adelaide had not just changed the tactical equation. She had fundamentally altered the psychological calculus that governed battlefield decisions. The overwhelming force that should have annihilated the SEAL team had been reduced to scattered fighters seeking survival rather than victory. The sound of helicopter rotors cutting through mountain air arrived like salvation, distant at first but growing steadily louder. Adelaide maintained her overwatch position, scanning the terrain for any remaining threats while the SEAL team consolidated in their new defensive position. The insurgent forces had scattered after losing their commander, small groups fleeing in the mountain terrain or attempting to break contact under covering fire that Adelaide systematically dismantled with precision shots. Apache gunships appeared over the eastern ridgeline, their distinctive profiles unmistakable against the morning sky. The pilots had received updates on the tactical situation during their flight, knew that friendly forces were engaged, and required immediate support. Within seconds of arriving on station, the helicopters unleashed their devastating firepower on the remaining insurgent positions. The 30mm chain guns ripped through enemy positions with surgical precision, guided by thermal imaging that revealed fighters attempting to hide in terrain features. Hellfire missiles streaked toward vehicles and heavy weapon positions, transforming them into rolling fireballs that sent black smoke pillars climbing into the clear air. The insurgent attack collapsed completely under the overwhelming firepower, survivors abandoning weapons and equipment in their desperate flight. Adelaide lowered her rifle, her part in the engagement complete. Private Chin sat back from the spotter scope, his face showing the exhaustion and adrenaline crash that followed intense combat. Sergeant Walsh stood at the tower railing watching the gunships work, occasionally shaking his head as if still processing what he had witnessed over the past hour. The ground relief force reached the SEAL team's position 15 minutes after the gunships arrived, their armored vehicles providing security while medical teams treated casualties. The radio traffic shifted from desperate combat communications to controlled after-action reporting, the systematic documentation of engagement details that would be analyzed and studied for lessons learned. Major Vance's voice came across the command frequency with official authority. Corporal Brennan, report to the operations center immediately upon securing your weapon and equipment. Adelaide acknowledged the order and began the methodical process of clearing her rifle and preparing it for transport back to the armory. Her hands moved with the same precision they had maintained throughout the engagement, muscle memory ensuring that every step was performed correctly regardless of fatigue or emotional state. Chun helped her gather the empty brass casings that littered the tower platform, each one representing a shot that had crossed impossible distances to find its target. 14 rounds fired, Walsh noted, watching Adelaide pack her equipment. 14 threats eliminated at ranges most snipers would not attempt. That is a perfect record under combat conditions that would break most shooters. Adelaide secured the rifle case and shouldered her pack. Perfect is just adequate execution of trained fundamentals, she said. Missing would have meant soldiers dying. That provides strong motivation for precision. The walk to the operations center felt surreal after the intensity of the engagement. Soldiers stared as she passed, word having spread throughout the base about the supply specialist who had saved a SEAL team through impossible marksmanship. Adelaide ignored the attention, focusing on the path ahead and the inevitable questions that awaited her. Major Vance stood in the operations center, surrounded by her staff, reviewing preliminary after-action reports on multiple computer displays. She looked up as Adelaide entered, her expression unreadable. Corporal Brennan, I have spent the past hour trying to reconcile your personnel file with what multiple observers witnessed you accomplish. Your records show basic rifle qualification scores, standard supply specialist training, nothing that suggests advanced marksmanship capabilities. Adelaide stood at attention, her response measured and factual. My records are accurate for my assigned military occupational specialty, ma'am. My marksmanship background predates my military service. Major Vance pulled up a file on her computer, scanning information that clearly surprised her. According to what my intelligence officer just discovered, you were junior national rifle champion 3 consecutive years. You held multiple records in long-range precision shooting. College programs and professional teams recruited you. Then you enlisted as a supply specialist and never mentioned any of this background. I chose to serve in a capacity that honored my father's memory, Adelaide replied. He taught me that service means doing what needs to be done, not seeking recognition or status. Supply chain management is critical to military operations. I am qualified and effective in that role. You are also qualified and effective at shooting, which you deliberately concealed, Vance observed. That deception troubles me. Corporal, Adelaide met the Major's eyes directly. I never lied about my capabilities, ma'am. I simply chose not to highlight skills that were not relevant to my assigned duties. This morning those skills became relevant, so I employed them. The operations center fell quiet officers and NCOs listening to the exchange while pretending to focus on their workstations. Major Vance studied Adelaide for a long moment, something shifting in her expression from official disapproval toward grudging respect. "You saved the lives of 6 Special Operations personnel this morning," she said finally. "Your actions prevented a complete tactical disaster and demonstrated capabilities this base did not know it possessed. That complicates the administrative response considerably." The door opened and Lieutenant Commander Slade entered, still wearing his combat gear and showing the physical evidence of the brutal engagement. Chief Petty Officer Makoa followed, his arm in a sling, but his bearings still projecting professional competence. Both men stopped when they saw Adelaide, their expressions complex mixtures of gratitude and disbelief. "Corporal Brennan," Slade said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, "I owe you an apology for my dismissive attitude about support personnel. I owe you my life and the lives of my team. What you accomplished this morning defies everything I understand about long-range marksmanship." Makoa stepped forward, extending his uninjured hand. "I have worked with some of the best snipers in the military," he said, "operators with years of specialized training and countless combat engagements. None of them could have made the shots you made this morning. You are operating at a level I have never witnessed." Adelaide shook his hand, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing the sincerity behind it. "I had good training from my father," she said. "He was an excellent teacher who demanded perfection in fundamentals. The rest is just practice and application." "Practice," Makoa repeated, shaking his head. "You eliminated 14 targets at ranges up to 4,000 meters in variable wind conditions and deteriorating light. You killed an enemy commander I could barely see with my scope. That is not practice. That is mastery." Major Vance cleared her throat, reclaiming control of the conversation. "Regardless of how Corporal Brennan acquired her skills, we now face decisions about how to properly employ them. Her current assignment does not reflect her capabilities, and keeping someone with her talents in supply management represents a misallocation of resources." Adelaide remained at attention, recognizing that her carefully constructed anonymity had been permanently destroyed by the morning's events. The quiet service she had chosen, the deliberate mediocrity that allowed her to honor her father's memory without seeking recognition, all of it had been stripped away by combat necessity. "I am prepared to serve in whatever capacity you determine is appropriate, ma'am," she said formally. "My preference would be to return to my supply duties, but I understand that decision may not be mine to make." Slade exchanged glances with Makoa, some unspoken communication passing between them. "With respect, Major," he said, "the Special Operations community needs personnel with Corporal Brennan's capabilities. There are reconnaissance and direct action missions where her skills would provide decisive advantages. I would like to formally request her transfer to Special Operations support." Adelaide felt the walls closing in, the quiet path she had chosen being replaced by exactly the kind of attention and recognition she had deliberately avoided. But she also understood the mathematics of military necessity. Skills this rare and this valuable could not be wasted counting supply crates when it might save lives in future operations. Major Vance nodded slowly. "That request will be forwarded through appropriate channels," she said. "In the meantime, Corporal Brennan remains assigned to this base under my command. But I suspect her duties are about to change significantly." The afternoon sun climbed toward its zenith as Adelaide returned to the supply depot, the familiar surroundings now feeling alien after the morning's events. Soldiers she passed offered nods of respect or outright stares. The invisible barrier that had kept her separate from the combat elements now completely dissolved. Private Chun jogged to catch up with her, his earlier nervousness replaced by an almost puppyish enthusiasm. "Corporal, everyone is talking about what happened," he said. "The tower crew, the operations staff, even the helicopter pilots who arrived after the shooting stopped. They're calling you the ghost because the insurgents never saw where the shots came from." Adelaide unlocked the depot and stepped inside, seeking refuge in routine tasks that might restore some sense of normalcy. "I am not interested in nicknames or recognition, Private," I did what the tactical situation required. Nothing more. But it was extraordinary. Chun pressed, following her into the depot. For 1,000-meter shots in combat conditions. The marksmanship instructors say that is beyond the capability of the weapon system you were using. They're saying you pushed the rifle past its documented maximum effective range. Adelaide began checking inventory levels on her computer, trying to focus on the mundane details of supply management. Maximum effective range is a statistical construct based on average shooter capability, she explained. With perfect fundamentals and proper environmental compensation, most weapon systems can exceed their documented specifications. The limit is usually the shooter, not the rifle. The radio on her vest crackled with Major Vance's voice. Corporal Brennan, report to conference room 2. We have visitors who want to discuss this morning's engagement. Adelaide secured the depot and walked to the operations building, Chun trailing behind until she firmly ordered him back to his guard post duties. The conference room held more people than she expected. Major Vance sat at the head of the table, Lieutenant Commander Slade and Chief Makoa to her right. 3 officers Adelaide did not recognize occupied the left side, their uniforms showing insignia from Special Operations Command and training units. A colonel with airborne and ranger tabs introduced himself as Marcus Hendricks, deputy commander of a special reconnaissance regiment. Corporal Brennan, he said without preamble, I have reviewed the preliminary after-action report from this morning's engagement. I have also watched the tower camera footage that captured portions of your shooting. What you accomplished represents capabilities we actively recruit and train operators to achieve over years of specialized instruction. Adelaide stood at attention, uncertain where this conversation was leading. I had advantages most military snipers do not receive, sir. My father devoted 15 years to teaching me precision marksmanship in civilian competitive shooting. That created a foundation the military could not easily replicate. Colonel Hendricks nodded. Your father was Staff Sergeant William Brennan, Bronze Star recipient, served 3 combat tours in Iraq. He was also a distinguished marksman who won multiple service rifle competitions. Your background is exceptional, but what interests me is your decision to hide those capabilities when you enlisted. I was not hiding capabilities, sir, Adelaide replied carefully. I was choosing to serve in a role that honored my father's lessons about humility and doing what needs to be done without seeking recognition. Supply chain management is critical work that few soldiers want to do. Noble sentiment, Hendricks said, but it represents a misallocation of rare talent. Specialists with your skill level appear maybe once in a generation. The military invests millions training snipers to reach proficiency levels you apparently achieved as a teenager. We cannot afford to have someone with your capabilities counting ammunition crates. Adelaide felt the careful structure of her chosen service path crumbling around her. With respect, sir, I enlisted to serve, not to showcase my shooting ability. If my skills become more valuable in another role, I will adapt. But I did not seek this attention. Makoa leaned forward, his expression serious. Corporal, attention found you whether you sought it or not. What you demonstrated this morning will be studied and analyzed. Special operations units across multiple services will want access to your capabilities. You can resist that, but ultimately the needs of the mission will determine how you are employed. One of the other officers, a major from Sniper Training Command, opened a laptop and turned it to face Adelaide. We have been analyzing your shots using the tower camera footage and ballistic modeling software. Your first round at 3,000 meters hit within 6 inches of point of aim. Your fourth round at 4,000 meters achieved similar precision. These are not lucky shots. This is consistent, repeatable performance under combat stress. Adelaide studied the screen, showing trajectory analysis and environmental factor calculations. The software had reverse-engineered her shots, confirming what she already knew. Perfect fundamentals, accurate environmental reading, proper compensation for all variables. The mathematics of precision translated into tactical results. Colonel Hendricks pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is a training program proposal for advanced reconnaissance operations. We want you to attend a 6-month course that would formalize your skills and integrate them with military tactical doctrine. Upon completion, you will be assigned to a special operations unit where your capabilities could be properly employed. Adelaide picked up the folder but did not open it. And if I decline this opportunity, sir? Hendricks met her eyes directly. Then you will remain at Forward Operating Base Sentinel as a supply specialist, but your skills are now documented and your capabilities are known. Every time a mission requires long-range precision fire, someone will ask why we are not employing you. Every time an operation fails for lack of precision marksmanship, someone will question the decision to keep you in logistics. You can refuse the formal training, but you cannot undo what happened this morning. The weight of the moment pressed down on Adelaide with physical force. She had chosen her path carefully, deliberately stepping away from competitive shooting and the recognition that came with it. Her enlistment had been about honoring her father through quiet service, about being excellent without needing everyone to know about it. But combat had its own logic, and military necessity cared nothing for personal preferences about anonymity. Lieutenant Commander Slade spoke, his voice carrying genuine respect. Corporal, I judged you poorly based on your assigned role. I assumed support personnel were less capable, less valuable to operations. You proved me wrong in the most dramatic way possible. If you choose this training path, I would be honored to work with you on future missions. Adelaide opened the folder and scanned the training program outline. Advanced stalking techniques, urban precision engagement, high-angle shooting, moving target interdiction, environmental compensation modeling. The curriculum read like a masterclass in everything her father had taught her, now formalized into military doctrine and tactical application. Major Vance spoke quietly. Adelaide, your father would be proud of what you accomplished this morning. Not because you killed 14 enemy combatants, but because you saved 6 American lives when no one else could. That is service at its highest level. The words hit harder than Adelaide expected, emotion threatening to crack the professional composure she maintained. Her father had taught her that true service meant being ready when needed, that skills were gifts meant to be used rather than hoarded. He had never sought glory for his own combat actions, but he had never hesitated when his capabilities could make a difference. I will attend the training program, she said finally, but I want something understood. I'm not doing this for recognition or career advancement. I'm doing this because soldiers died this morning, and if my skills can prevent that in future operations, then using them becomes a moral obligation. Colonel Hendricks smiled slightly. That is exactly the attitude we look for in special operations personnel. Welcome to a different kind of service, Corporal Brennan. The meeting concluded with administrative details and timeline discussions. Adelaide would remain at Forward Operating Base Sentinel for 2 more weeks before transferring to the training command. Major Vance would handle her transition duties, ensuring her supply management responsibilities were properly transferred to her replacement. Adelaide left the conference room and walked across the compound toward her quarters. The afternoon heat was building, soldiers moving between duty stations with the perpetual motion of a military base maintaining readiness. Everything looked the same as it had that morning before the attack, but Adelaide knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. She reached her quarters and sat on her bunk, pulling out the photograph of her father. His smile looked back at her across the years, proud and confident, a man who had understood the true meaning of service. Adelaide traced the frame edge with her finger, speaking words only he would understand. I try to do it your way, Dad. Quiet service without recognition. But combat has its own rules, and skills like ours cannot stay hidden when people are dying. I hope you understand why I am taking this path. The photograph offered no answers, but Adelaide felt a measure of peace settling over her. Her father had taught her to shoot, but more importantly, he had taught her why the skill mattered. Not for medals or glory, but for the simple mathematics of saving lives when the moment demanded everything you had trained for. The 2 weeks following the engagement passed with surreal momentum, each day bringing Adelaide closer to a future she had never planned but could no longer avoid. The base transformed around her, soldiers who had barely noticed the quiet supply specialist, now seeking opportunities to talk with her, to hear firsthand accounts of the impossible shots that had saved the SEAL team. Adelaide deflected most of the attention, maintaining her focus on the transition duties that would prepare her replacement to assume supply management responsibilities. Private Chun appointed himself as her unofficial assistant, helping with inventory transfers and equipment accountability while asking endless questions about marksmanship fundamentals and precision shooting techniques. Adelaide tolerated his enthusiasm because beneath the hero worship was genuine interest in understanding the science behind long-range engagement. Wind reading is the hardest skill to develop, she explained one afternoon while they processed ammunition transfers. You can calculate distance precisely, account for elevation and temperature, but wind changes constantly and affects bullet flight in complex ways. Learning to read environmental indicators takes years of practice. Chun absorbed the information eagerly, making notes in a small notebook he had started carrying. The tower footage shows you barely hesitated between target acquisition and firing. How do you make the calculations that quickly? Adelaide continued her computer entries, her tone remaining instructional. Eventually, the calculations become automatic, like a basketball player knowing the angle and force needed for a free throw without consciously computing trajectories. Your brain learns the patterns through repetition until the math happens below conscious awareness. The SEAL team remained at Forward Operating Base Sentinel while their casualties recovered and their equipment was reconstituted. Adelaide encountered them regularly, brief conversations that revealed the profound impact her actions had created. Lieutenant Commander Slade approached her one evening as she secured the depot, his bearing noticeably less arrogant than their first interaction. "Corporal," he said, "I wanted you to know that my after-action report to Special Operations Command emphasized your decisive impact on mission survival. I recommended you for a Bronze Star with Valor Device. What you accomplished under fire deserves formal recognition." Adelaide locked the depot entrance, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I appreciate the thought, sir, but awards were not why I acted. The tactical situation required precision fire, and I had the capability to provide it. The successful outcome is recognition enough." Slade shook his head. "You saved 6 lives while simultaneously defending your own base under attack. That represents courage and skill that should be formally acknowledged. The military needs to know that excellence exists in unexpected places, that support personnel can demonstrate combat capabilities that rival any operator." The comment carried weight precisely because it came from someone whose previous attitude had dismissed support specialists as lesser contributors. Adelaide recognized the transformation in his thinking, understood that the engagement had challenged fundamental assumptions about military hierarchy and capability distribution. Chief Petty Officer Makoa joined them, his arms still in the sling, but his recovery progressing steadily. "The command is fast-tracking your training pipeline," he said. "Colonel Hendricks wants you in the advanced course within 10 days of arriving at the training command. That is half the usual preparation timeline." Adelaide felt the pressure of compressed schedules and elevated expectations. "I will be ready, sir. My fundamentals are solid, and I adapt quickly to new tactical concepts." Makoa smiled slightly. "We are not worried about your fundamentals, Corporal. What you demonstrated under combat conditions proved your technical proficiency beyond any doubt. The training will focus on integrating your skills with team tactics and mission planning, teaching you to be part of a special operations unit rather than a solo performer." The distinction mattered. Adelaide had always shot alone or in controlled competitive environments where individual performance was the only variable. Operating as part of a tactical team would require different skills, communication protocols, and coordination that she had never needed to develop. The prospect excited and intimidated her in equal measure. Major Vance scheduled a final meeting 2 days before Adelaide's departure. The base commander's office felt more formal than their previous encounters. Official documents spread across the desk representing the administrative complexity of transferring a soldier to special operations training. "Your replacement arrives tomorrow," Vance said, reviewing transfer orders. Staff Sergeant Morrison has 8 years of supply management experience and strong leadership capability. He will maintain the standards you established here. Adelaide nodded her acknowledgement. I have prepared detailed transition documents covering all ongoing projects and potential issues. The depot is in excellent condition and inventory accountability is current. Vance set down the paperwork and studied Adelaide with an expression that mixed respect and concern. You understand that the path you are taking is considerably more dangerous than supply management. Special operations personnel face elevated risk levels during every deployment. Your life expectancy in combat has statistically decreased. I understand the risks, ma'am, Adelaide replied. But I also understand that my skills can prevent other soldiers from dying. That seems like a fair exchange. Your father would likely argue the same thing, Vance said quietly. He was offered multiple opportunities to move into training positions or administrative roles that would have kept him away from combat. He chose to remain with tactical units because he believed his experience saved lives. You're following a similar path. The comparison resonated deeply with Adelaide. Her father had never sought safety or comfort when his capabilities could make a difference. He had taught her that true service meant accepting risk when the mission required it, that expertise carried obligations beyond personal survival. I am proud of what you accomplished here, Vance continued. Not just the engagement that saved the SEAL team, but the quiet professionalism you demonstrated every day in a role most soldiers would consider beneath their talents. You proved that excellence does not require recognition, that doing ordinary work extraordinarily well matters as much as dramatic combat actions. Thank you, ma'am, Adelaide said, feeling genuine emotion behind the formal response. This assignment taught me that service takes many forms, and all of them matter when performed with dedication. The final days passed quickly. Adelaide completed her transition duties, packed her personal equipment, and prepared for travel to the Special Operations Training Command. The morning of her departure brought unexpected ceremony. Major Vance assembled the base personnel for a formation that acknowledged Adelaide's contributions and upcoming transfer. The formal award presentation happened before the assembled soldiers. Slade read the citation for the Bronze Star with Valor Device, words describing her actions during the engagement with precision and respect. When he pinned the medal to her uniform, Adelaide felt the weight of recognition she had spent years avoiding. But she also felt her father's presence, understood that he would have been proud not of the medal, but of the service it represented. The SEAL team formed an honor line as Adelaide walked to the helicopter that would begin her journey to the training command. Each operator saluted as she passed, a gesture of respect from professionals who understood exactly what her capabilities meant in the unforgiving mathematics of combat. Makoa was the last in line, his good hand raised in crisp salute. You changed how we think about capability and contribution, he said. That matters more than any single engagement. Good luck with training, Corporal. We will be watching your career with great interest. Adelaide returned the salute and boarded the helicopter, securing her equipment as the crew chief prepared for departure. The rotors spun up and the aircraft lifted from the pad, forward operating base Sentinel falling away beneath her. She watched the compound shrink into the mountain landscape, a small outpost where she had learned profound lessons about service and sacrifice. The helicopter banked toward the east, following valleys that would eventually deliver her to the training command and the next phase of her military career. Adelaide settled back in her seat, one hand resting on the rifle case that held her father's weapon. The path ahead would be challenging and dangerous, would demand everything she had learned and more besides. But she was ready. Not because she sought glory or recognition, but because skills used when they could save lives represented a moral failure she refused to accept. Her father had taught her that lesson in the Montana hills, and combat had reinforced it with brutal clarity. Adelaide Brennan was done hiding her capabilities. The military needed what she could provide, and she would get it with the same quiet excellence she had always pursued, just in a considerably more dangerous context than counting supply crates. The Special Operations Training Command occupied a sprawling facility carved into terrain that seemed designed specifically to challenge every assumption about what was physically possible. Adelaide arrived on a gray morning that matched her uncertainty about the path ahead. The helicopter delivered her to a landing pad surrounded by ranges and training facilities that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship instruction. Colonel Hendricks met her personally, a gesture that emphasized the command's interest in her capabilities. "Welcome to the most challenging 6 months of your military career," he said without preamble. "We have trained thousands of special operations snipers here. Most of them arrive thinking they understand precision marksmanship. You are the first student who arrives already operating at a level most graduates aspire to achieve." Adelaide shouldered her pack, the rifle case balanced carefully in her other hand. "I have technical proficiency, sir, but I lack tactical integration and team coordination. That is what I need to learn here." Hendricks led her across the compound, pointing out various training facilities as they walked. "You will be integrated into a class that started 2 weeks ago. Normally, we would not allow that, but your demonstrated capabilities convinced us you can catch up on the administrative and doctrinal material quickly. The tactical training is what matters." The barracks assigned to her class held 12 other students, all of them already selected for special operations roles before arriving for advanced sniper training. Adelaide's entrance drew immediate attention, soldiers pausing conversations to assess the newcomer who had been inserted mid-course. A staff sergeant with Ranger Scroll and Special Forces tab approached, his expression openly skeptical. "You must be Brennan," he said. "Word came down that we were getting a supply specialist who allegedly made impossible shots during a combat engagement. Most of us are wondering if the stories got exaggerated during transmission." Adelaide set her gear on an empty bunk, meeting his skepticism with calm professionalism. "Stories often grow during retelling," she acknowledged. "The basic facts are accurate, though. I engaged targets at extended range during a defensive operation. The shots connected, and friendly casualties were prevented." Another student, a Marine Corps Scout sniper named Reeves, laughed without humor. "Extended range," she says. "The briefing we got claimed you were hitting targets at 4,000 meters. That is fairy tale distance, not real shooting." Adelaide began unpacking her equipment, not rising to the challenge, but not backing down either. Ballistics and environmental factors determine what distances are achievable with proper fundamentals. 4,000 meters requires perfect execution and favorable conditions, but it is within the realm of technical possibility. The class instructor entered before the conversation could escalate further. Master Sergeant Dalton carried the bearing of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft and teaching it to others. He assessed Adelaide with experienced eyes, seeing past the controversy to evaluate her potential. "Corporal Brennan," he said, "you have created quite a stir by joining us mid-course. Tomorrow morning we have a qualification shoot that will establish baseline capabilities for all students. I suggest you use the afternoon to familiarize yourself with our range facilities and prepare your equipment. Consider it your opportunity to demonstrate whether the stories are accurate or exaggerated." The next morning arrived cold and clear, perfect conditions for precision shooting. The qualification course required engaging targets at progressively increasing distances, from 600 meters to 1,500 meters, using standard-issue military sniper rifles and ammunition. Adelaide drew her lane assignment and began the methodical preparation that preceded any serious shooting. The other students watched with barely concealed interest as she established her firing position, checked her equipment, and began the environmental assessment that would inform her calculations. Master Sergeant Dalton observed from the instruction tower, binoculars ready to evaluate every shot. The course began with 600-meter targets, relatively straightforward shots that all qualified snipers could make consistently. Adelaide settled into her position and began engaging targets with mechanical precision, each shot breaking clean and impacting within the required scoring zone. She moved through 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,200 meters, each distance requiring increasingly complex calculations but presenting no fundamental challenges to her capabilities. The 1,500-meter targets represented the course's maximum distance, shots that typically separated exceptional students from merely competent ones. Adelaide made her environmental assessments, calculated her corrections, and engaged the targets with the same calm precision she had maintained throughout. 5 shots, 5 impacts in the scoring zone, performance that would have been noteworthy if the other students had not been waiting for something more dramatic. Staff Sergeant Reeves approached after the qualification concluded, his earlier skepticism replaced by confusion. "You shot expert-level scores," he said, "but nothing that proves the stories about combat engagements at impossible distances. The course maximum is 1,500 meters. You were supposedly hitting targets at almost 3 times that range." Adelaide cleaned her rifle, her tone remaining neutral. This qualification establishes baseline proficiency using standard equipment and known distances. Combat engagements involve different variables, different pressures, different stakes. The skills transfer, but the context differs significantly. Master Sergeant Dalton called the class together for after-action review, discussing individual performances and areas requiring improvement. He saved Adelaide for last, his expression thoughtful as he addressed her shooting. "Corporal Brennan demonstrated technical proficiency that meets course standards," he said, "but I suspect we have not seen her actual capabilities yet. The stories from her combat engagement suggest someone operating well beyond what this morning's qualification revealed." He paused, then made a decision that shifted the dynamic completely. "Tomorrow we are conducting an advanced exercise for students who have mastered the standard curriculum. Targets at 2,000 meters and beyond, variable wind conditions, unknown distances requiring range estimation. Corporal Brennan will participate despite being new to the course. Let us see what she can actually do when pushed beyond conventional parameters." The advanced exercise took place on a range that stretched across mountain terrain, targets positioned at extreme distances that tested equipment limitations and shooter capabilities simultaneously. Adelaide found herself grouped with the 3 top performers from the class, all of them seasoned operators with multiple combat deployments and years of specialized training. The first target sat at 2,100 meters, barely visible even through high-powered optics. The wind pushed across the valley in complex patterns, shifting velocity and direction across different elevation bands. Adelaide studied the environment, her mind processing variables and calculating corrections with the automatic precision developed through 10,000 hours of practice. She settled into position and fired. 3 seconds later, the target indicator showed a center mass hit. The other shooters exchanged glances, their skepticism beginning to crack. Adelaide moved to the next target at 2,400 meters, repeated her process, and achieved another scoring hit. Master Sergeant Dalton watched through a spotting scope, his expression shifting from professional assessment to genuine amazement. For more targets followed, each one pushing beyond 3,000 meters into the realm where most shooters could not achieve consistent accuracy. Adelaide engaged them all with the same mechanical precision, her performance demonstrating capabilities that validated every story that had preceded her arrival. The final target sat at 3,800 meters, placed specifically to exceed what the instructors believed was possible with the equipment and ammunition available. Adelaide spent 5 minutes studying the environment, making calculations that accounted for dozens of variables most shooters never considered. Then she settled behind her rifle and took the shot. The bullet flew for nearly 5 seconds before impact. The target indicator flashed, confirming a hit that should not have been possible. The range fell silent, every instructor and student processing what they had just witnessed. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment, or tell us about someone you know who serves with quiet strength and hidden capabilities that only reveal themselves when circumstances demand everything they have. Staff Sergeant Reeves approached Adelaide as she cleared her rifle, his earlier hostility completely gone. "I apologize for doubting you," he said simply. "What you just demonstrated is beyond anything I have seen in 15 years of military service." Adelaide acknowledged the apology with a nod, but no triumph. Skills are just tools, she said. What matters is using them when they can make a difference. This morning was demonstration. Combat is application. They are not the same thing. Master Sergeant Dalton gathered the class, his decades of experience showing in how he framed what they had witnessed. You just watch someone operating at a level most of you will never achieve, he said. But the lesson is not about feeling inadequate. The lesson is about understanding that excellence comes from dedication to fundamentals and willingness to push beyond comfortable limitations. Corporal Brennan did not develop these capabilities overnight. She built them through years of disciplined practice under someone who demanded perfection. The training continued for the remaining months, Adelaide absorbing tactical integration and team coordination skills, while her marksmanship capabilities became the benchmark against which other students measured their progress. She learned to operate as part of special reconnaissance teams, to coordinate with forward air controllers, to integrate her precision fire into complex operations involving multiple elements. The transformation was complete when Colonel Hendricks delivered her graduation orders. Adelaide Brennan was no longer a supply specialist hiding extraordinary capabilities. She was a special operations sniper with documented performance that would influence how the military thought about precision engagement for years to come. But she remained the same person her father had taught in the Montana Hills. Someone who understood that service meant doing what needed to be done, that skills were gifts to be used rather than hoarded, that recognition mattered less than results. Adelaide had tried to serve quietly, to honor her father through anonymous excellence. Combat had demanded she step into the light. She did so not because she sought glory, but because soldiers' lives hung in the balance, and her capabilities could tip the scales toward survival. That was the lesson her father had really taught her, the one that mattered more than any technical skill. When a mission demands everything you have, you give it without hesitation or complaint. You serve with the tools you have been given, using them to the absolute limit of their capability. And you do it not for medals or recognition, but because that is what service means to those who understand its deepest truth. Adelaide Brennan had learned that lesson in a supply depot and proven it on a tower platform while soldiers died and needed saving. Everything that followed was just the military finally understanding what her father had always known. His daughter was extraordinary. She just preferred not to mention it unless circumstances made hiding impossible.